woman wouldn't speak in front of the man. You know, there was these aspects. So actually, to be able to build a voice, it was important to bring the mothers together, bring the fathers together, bring the children together. You know, see what we have in common as kids, as husbands, as wife, and then bring the families back together again when we have built this shared opinion. My situation is this, and this is how I think we should solve it. Once we manage to establish a way for each member of the family to contribute to the process and express their issues, their views, and their aspirations, we could bring them back together again, collectively. So it was, you know, it's about how do you build different point of views into the discussions rather than making everyone agree. Then how do we kind of give shape to these shared ambitions and the visions that we got? The children's, you know, they were developed the program. They knew what they needed to improve their you know, study situation, how to focus. And their mothers, they were in charge of, you know, the design of the study center, trying to implement these ideas that the kids were communicating to their parents. And the fathers, you know, they were implementing the designs that the mother developed on site. But in doing so, also developed the design because their informal knowledge was different than the formal knowledge of the skilled workers. So there was a two-way contribution, which was very, very beautiful, where they brought in aspects to the design that we would never really be able to contribute with, coming from a different worldview, different point of view. So eventually, what are the values that was created in this process of Parian, of Dugnad, and what are the tangible and intangible impacts of a project like this? Well, first of all, the family stated that from their point of view, they had rediscovered Parian on what it meant for them. But for Parian to exist, or at least for Dugnad to exist, there needs to be a sense of community. And they had created this by coming together for a shared purpose, and this purpose had been their children. So the process was, you know, had contributed to build relations within the community, and also to strengthen the internal relations within the family. So this was an intangible aspect that, you know, came as a part of bringing them into the project. And secondly, they built this building for the children. It's a place for the children to study. And it was not just a building that they built a sense of pride and effort. It was their efforts and it was their skills that contributed to make this building. So it's something that it represented what they wanted to do for their children. They even, I was fascinated by all these fantastic Filipino terms, stuff that I didn't really know until I heard it and had to like Google it or find out what it meant. So they referred to this, in their point of view, they had made something called Bahay na Bato. Although it's not really the same, huh? I understand that, but in their point of view, having gone through this architectural design process, first wanting to build a concrete building, and then actually realizing that we have a lot of fantastic knowledge on vernacular, using bamboo, using wood, and that was the transformation, I think, which was very, very, very fantastic for me as an outsider to come in and be part of and learning, you know. The children developed rules for how to use the building. They would not let anyone go in with shoes, for example. This is one of the kids washing the door. This is the shared study space where the kids would study with the natural breeze coming to the building. You know, a lot of them had tuberculosis, so they couldn't really necessarily have air conditioning. You needed natural ventilation. The space to the left was a private study space for the older kids to study away from the younger kids. The image to the right, oh sorry, it's opposite. The image to the right was a private study space. The image to the left was a group study space. And this was the building at night time. Now many of these kids were living on the street before, and many of them were living outside the local coffee shop, a Bose coffee shop. So they were calling this Bose for a while. So on the 8th of November, 2013, I think you know, but Yolanda hit Tacloban, it hit the central regions of Philippines. And this, with the storm surge and the wind, displacing more than 4 million people, and many people lost their lives. The path of Yolanda was through Tacloban, and it destroyed everything. We're gonna play you a little bit of a video. Can you hear me? Can I still talk? So the children and the family members, they survived the typhoon by climbing onto the roof of a nearby building, less exposed to the ocean. From there, they could see the waves coming in from the water, taking away their homes and also taking away the study center that we built together. What was very emotional for me, one of the fathers, when he saw the waves coming in, he took his wife, he took his child to run up on the roof. You can see this is from the roof looking into the ocean. Not the ocean, onto land, but that's the water coming up. You can barely see the study center ruin in the water. But when he brought his wife and his daughter to the roof, he also brought one object, one thing that he really wanted to say. And he brought the blueprints for the study center. If this typhoon took away everything, it was not going to take away what they built together. And if the building was not there, they would come back together and build it up again. The building was something more. It was something they wanted to. Yeah. This is them on the. Yeah. This is in the streetlight side, the NGO that basically runs the operation of this study center. So Seawall, by name, it was called Seawall because it was located in front of the sea protection barrier. It was devastated by the waves and the boats that were pushed ashore. And Streetlight, same. This was Tacloban before the storm, and then this was Tacloban after. Everything was gone. It was tough. I came back about 4 months afterwards. And by then the study center was gone. But like I said, no? The Tatai that went to the roof, the relationships that were built in the process could not be taken by the storm. The building was a symbol for their values, their efforts and contributions and emotions that they had put into the project for the children. The community came together after disaster, and it was said afterwards that they had used Parian as a way to build back their own homes. And one family also tried to build back the study center with the debris that they had available in the park. But the community had a different opinion. This didn't quite look like the study center. So they had to do it one more time. I returned, like I said, 4 months after the disaster. They had invited me back to build up again. By then, I met Sudar.
And so around this time, I think around 6 months after Yolanda, we felt then compelled, as architects, to try and do something, to try to contribute our own in our own way to this process. And so we got in touch with Alex, and of course he brought his own team with him, including Ramble from the UK, landscape architects, and of course Streetlight. So he made that connection between us as the architectural firm and the organization of Streetlight. So on our end, we were able to also convince a lot of other engineers to be able to sort of participate in this process of bayanihan. So we had electrical engineers and structural engineers and sanitary engineers to all sort of put in their own effort and try to help build back a sense of community. So next, even from within the firm, so we recall the values that we saw from that original building, and we created basically a sign-up sheet of everyone within our firm who sort of wanted to help or volunteer their time to help participate in this bayanihan process in a way of sort of design. So at the time that that was going on, the relocation process has also already began. So the idea was to relocate majority of the cities from downtown Tacloban, 16 kilometers north in a place called the Northern Relocation Zone. And this is the site where Streetlight, as an organization, had some land that they wanted to move their whole facility to. Around that time also, we found the various relocation efforts that have been done, and we inspected them and took a look at what has been going on around 6 to 8 months after Yolanda. So basically in Anibong, which is near the seawall area, basically by that time almost everything had gone back to its old old form, basically. So you had people living up to the waterline again, shanties and things that have developed post Yolanda, quite in the same way. Next, we also had the bunk houses, which were provided by the government. But as you can see, I think the conditions that they were living in were not tenable, and it's actually indefensible as a sort of even as a minimum standard. Next, we also saw an area called Nukawayan, which involved sort of the more permanent relocation sites. So this had the typical row houses with just basically simple roofs, simple space, simple materials, very basic. And it was all created in sort of in mass. Some of the problems that existed here also had to do with not being able to give the proper connection to utilities. So there was no water, there's no electricity. Even like maybe 2 years, almost a year or more after the disaster. So from their temporary shelters, they were transferred onto these houses. But basically, they weren't given enough connection or infrastructure to be able to live properly. I think this highlights also this problem where we have sort of like a checkbox mentality. That basically, okay, we need 10,000 houses, for example, and the people just come in and say, okay, let's build 10,000 houses and that's it. Check, we're done. But that's not enough. There are also some instances where we found Brigham Estate. The idea here was that people would be allowed to build their own sort of houses or housing system. So they were given land and then they could build whatever they wanted on it. So you get a variety of translations, but at the same time, we understand that there are sort of good intentions on many aspects, on many levels. So one of the examples that we show here is on the upper right corner, is called the Butterfly House. The intention was to build a relocatable, collapsible, demountable, transportable shelter, which would allow people to relocate and sort of transition quite easily onto different sites post-disaster. But if you see the actuality of this thing, it has no sort of consideration for the human aspect of actually living. So it was too hot, it was made of materials which I think could be potentially hazardous to the health. There's no acoustic privacy, there's no thermal protection, there's basically no provision for any sort of idea of what it would be like to live in there. And finally, we also went to Kali Shelter, which is a temporary settlement, but we found that basically there was an intention in this development to create a sense of community. So you can see the pattern of the houses, the materials that were used, and sort of the idea that they were trying to even provide for a sense of community by providing sort of small pocket gardens where people could plant their own plant some fruits or flowers, and it sort of formed a sense of responsibility about taking care of the place. So the people that we talked to here, they were saying that basically, yes, we have our own system of what do you call this? Like cleaning up your own front yard, and sort of sharing also in sort of a community facility where they had some gatherings as well. So we really felt that even if it is a temporary shelter, it was much more sort of human in the sense of trying to form a connection between the community. So what we'd like to highlight is that basically the way that the relocation was done really underscores the problem with our orientation to and objectification of the world. So there is a tendency to treat individuals and space as resources to be distributed and managed. So this creates a barrier to understanding their value beyond commodity. And therefore, it sort of makes it almost impossible to form a sense of community and place.
Hi. Okay. So the relocation had made people into numbers, which is understandable because it's a big job trying to bring so many people. But by making people into numbers, you also don't recognize that there are social relationships, community ties, community cohesion, and once you split those, you lose what comes with it. You know, everything that has to do with safety, trust. What you experienced in the northern relocation zone was an increase in, crime, difficulties in general, a lot because the safety net of the community wasn't there anymore. We had learned in 2010 that we need to create a sense of community, which in 2010 was this shared idea of realizing the dream for our children. We learned that we need to identify what is it that we have in common. So what is it that we share, so that we can trigger a new process of Parian, build community cohesion within the communities that we work in. So as we followed the community to the north, we were going to build this site, this relocation project for streetlight, consisting of orphanage, office, study center, and a park for the community, or official space. But the point was, the way we need to do this is through a type of Parian process. We need to do this collaboratively. The community wanted initially to build back the study center, but the needs and the conditions were different. So the first step was to collectively rethink the program, define what was needed, and who would be in charge and how we did this. This is a diagram made by the community illustrating these aspects of the process that we need to start. This was the programming phase of the workshop, design Parian Dugnad process. This time we also wanted the community to be in charge. This Parian should be facilitated by them for themselves, right? This is the committee elected by the group of parents that would be in charge of facilitating these weekly gatherings that we had. Now, Parian became a platform for us to address the trauma of the typhoon, to collectively define what we lost and what we wanted to change or what we wanted to build back. To do this, the children modeled the old buildings and programs onto the new site in Puerta, which was the area. And as they were doing that, they had to reflect on what is it that we're now taking from our old home and placing in this new place. What are the core values that we want to bring to the north, And there was two interesting points that came out, and the first one is that from the roof, the children had seen this old play castle built in concrete, and it survived the storm, it survived the waves, and it became something which they thought, this is a safe place. We want this safe place in Talpuro, in this northern relocation zone. And secondly, they couldn't let go of the study center, so there was one aspect they really wanted to keep, and that was the idea of a light timber structure, allowing for this natural ventilation, capturing the breeze. So these 2 points, the heavy and the safe concrete castle, and the light and ventilated study center, these two concepts became the starting point or the common language for us to start talking about architecture.
Moving on to the site, I think, so we came in, and the first thing, of course, that architects would do together is that we went on a site visit and saw basically that the site was, where the relocation would have happened, is in a relatively flat site with, of course, coconut trees around. And on the site, actually, we found there was an existing chicken shed where basically it was used as a farm for chickens to harvest yeah, harvest chickens or farm chickens, I guess is a better word. So based on the site and based on the concepts that we've had initially discussed, we sort of came up with a master plan of trying to sort of create a protected space within the site for the students and for the orphanage and for the streetlight as a community to happen. So at the same time, there was also a very clear intention to try and create a portion which the larger community of Tagpuro would be able to be involved in. So we had to sort of balance this idea of creating a protected internal space with an external sort of connection to the city at large. Okay. Yeah. Moving on now, going into details and building up on this idea of the heavy volume with the light frame, the ventilated frame, and this idea of what is secure and what is sort of open. We created some studies and tried to sort of analyze this idea of what is the heavy volume and what is the light frame and how it can interact and sort of create an architectural framework by which we can layer on different concerns or affordances or possibilities onto this frame. So in some cases, for example, as architects, we'd always like to think that we want to put considerations about lighting, about ventilation, about earthquake resilience or typhoon resilience, and also many other things of like materiality even or honesty and these other values which we intrinsically understand. So right off the bat, given the number of volunteers that we had at the firm and a lot of really good passionate people wanting to be part of it, we did our own internal schematics of how we translate this idea of heavy volume and a lighter frame. So of course the diagrams that we did study the configuration of the roof, configuration of the skin, how it's related to the program and how it relates to sort of affordances in terms of an inside and outside connection and many other things, of course. So these are some of the studies which we translate that concept into sort of various architectural translations. So what is clear here though is that there is still this language going through of that heavy volume, heavy concrete solid volume and that light frame. There was also a clear intention of trying to adapt it to what we felt was like a more humanly scaled architecture and more humanly scaled and sort of locally sensitive sort of construction method. So these are some of the studies, just a summary of it, how it all looked. At some point, of course, we went a bit too wild, I think, in creating dome structures and all that. So, but you can see that all of these have, oh, it's gone. We're back. Oops. all right, on here. Yeah, I have no jokes. It's okay. Okay. Anyway, so basically we're just trying to show how the architects sort of want to try and involve ourselves in the more architectural side of things. But of course, there are many other. All right, I'm just going back, just showing to the roof structure. Yes, we went a bit wild, of course, but that's to do with, I think, how we wanted the architecture to reflect typhoon sensibility and sort of like how it relates to construction method as well. So we did also the wind studies, how to analyze how the structure behaves in the different wind conditions. So we also had to sort of consider that basically the light frames would be opened into would be open so that the typhoon can pass through. So instead of trying to sort of fight with the typhoon, we're sort of like using it passively as sort of allowing it to go through the building. So this was just a concept that we had from before. It had happened from we learned from the previous building. And of course, we also had to do studies about how the building had to be scaled for using the materials that we were using in terms of how it's constructed and how it relates to the natural tendency of materials to have certain limits. So, and also, of course, we wanted to suit the construction method to the construction capability of the people that would have been there in the time that it was happening. And so, of course, we had a lot of design sessions internally. We made scale models, we made meetings, and also a lot of discussions about the site planning, how it relates to the architecture and the community, and everything else. Yeah. No, you're doing this.
Sorry, I think it's a bit delayed sometimes, but okay. So it's basically coming back to Tacloban. Simultaneously, as we have a team, Sudar and everyone working in Manila, occasionally coming down, the community is still working, and we're still discussing the same topics. These are illustrations of the activities and the spaces. You know, what is a library? You know, library, I mean, it's about reading, it's about studying. And again, this idea of games and play and acting and poems and drawing, these were tools that they were using to talk about architectural issues. Right? Different ways of approaching and communicating the same thing. Trying to look at how we can change the idea of architecture or building or programs as a product into looking at it as the kind of stage for everyday life, for activities. You know? What do we actually do? Discussing it through drawing, discussing it through model making, you know? The light structures, the heavy structures, how do they relate to each other? You know, where do we position them? What do they do? What's in them? At the same time, talking about the spatial relationships between the activities and qualities within the building, and how we're gonna roof it. What is, you know, apart from the heavy boxes, what is this light structure that we're talking about? And once you have this light structure, this heavy structure, these ideas that we're developing, trying to look at this in full scale on the site. How does it fit with the climate? How does it fit with the surroundings? I think you need to turn it off. Now it's there again.
Yeah, so what we realized through this process is there's a dual relationship between the architects and the community. We felt like really we were using this idea of the heavy and volume as sort of an architectural language by which we communicate to the community and the community communicates to us. So when they say, oh, we want a heavy volume here, we want 2 bays of light volume, we automatically understood what they meant. So, and at the same time, we felt like sometimes some considerations we were saying, okay, this heavy volume doesn't work here, and we have to move it there and enlarge this or that part. It also became intelligible for them. So what we found out is that basically we can use architecture as a language, as a responsive framework by which we can layer on different meanings onto. So the architects would like to communicate meanings about how materiality, honesty, and also our connection to nature, our connection to a larger sort of ideas. And the community, on the other hand, connects their psychological concerns about how, for example, we want to feel secure in this or that space, or how we want to sort of feel when we are inside the space. So to us, it was a great realization that basically architecture can serve as a tool or as a design method or as a process by which various concerns can be sort of layered onto and sort of attached and sort of integrated in. And I think as a very clear example of that, I think Alex will discuss the next part, which is...
Okay, yeah. So one example that is quite interesting. This came after the program, the spaces and activities were fixed, and the idea of where the heavy and the lights would be. At this point, we could focus on the doors, on the windows, and the different elements of the building. Now these are drawings made by the children, illustrating not just what a window is, but what a window does. And Suda challenged me to try to read one. But I'm just going to do the first sentence because I don't know. Ine nga bintana kon nag-studies ako deni ako nalingkod kay para presko. Did that make sense? But there was also very poetic reflections on what a window is, right? Some of the children saw the window as a contemplative space. It's a place for reflection. It's a place for the future. It's where you look out. It's a place where you're safe. Yeah, it's a place where you do the song to the Harana to the girl standing outside. Was one of the child. I think it was 8 years old. I think it's quite cute. Now, coming back to what happened in 2010, who defines the meaning of what we do? And who would want to listen to who says what? Imagine the parents listening to their children saying what a window is, and then you're asked to implement it, you know? It means something, because it was your child that said it. Now the fathers would take this meaning of what a window is back into the community. They were looking around, where could we find these windows that the kids are talking about? And once they found something that kind of, to some extent, represented what the children were talking about, they would illustrate it and present it back to the other parents. I think this window is important, I think this window does that, right? Once we identified these windows, we would then try to make samples. You know, how do we actually make what we're talking about? Action, reflection, learning by doing, and trying in different materials. You know, bamboo, wood, and eventually testing it out on site and getting it quality checked by their wives. The structure that you see in the back, it's a mock-up. It was a test that we built before we started construction of the buildings, and it was a way for us to communicate aspects of the design back and forth between the community and us, but also as a way for us to exchange formal and informal knowledge. You know, it becomes real when it becomes full scale. It becomes real when you use the materials, when you put these materials together, and you kind of realize what these materials means and what this space means, size. And it also enabled us to communicate with the contractor, which was then would be managing the site, to get basically employing the parents on site to build it, but still responsible for kind of managing the site. To also test different solutions and ideas and ways to do things, sequences, you know, on the construction side before actually doing the real building. You can make mistakes are okay, you know. It's a learning process. I think that's a really important point. It's a learning process that we're going through together, the contractor, the architect, the community. So mistakes are great. You know, beautiful mistakes sometimes. And once we had an idea of what we're doing, you know, this principle of the heavy and the light, you'd have this checked by our engineers. I mean, maybe you want to continue. Yeah.
Basically, we felt like we had to really test the idea that we had learned from the start and make sure that basically, if we do intend for the buildings, for the typhoon to pass through the buildings, that it would work. And what we found through simulation, at least, is that it does work. And it confirmed our initial sort of gathered knowledge from the site that basically the strategy of opening the buildings for the typhoon really does work. So just to give a summary of how the buildings have evolved from the whole design process, we'd just like to share you a couple of diagrams about how these the various buildings on site are sort of conceived of and built up. So this is the orphanage. So it's a series of blocks again. And then above that, we cover it with a more tectonic frame. And then, of course, we cover it with the roofs and we infill it with the windows that the fathers designed. So next is also the office and the training center. Basically, it's also a series of blocks, but then it's set into the landscape a little bit. So it creates a little bit of a different condition programmatically. But also again with the frame and the roof, and then next with the windows.
Just add to this actually, because when we're developing the language that we're kind of designing with together with the community, that language needs to have a variety as well. So, you know, although in the orphanage, the building is a two-story one, what happens when it becomes one story, and how can we make that switch quickly when we get to the stage of making decisions? The office is a mix of both, you know. It's both one story and two story.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, all right. Anyway, moving forward, so I think what Alex was trying to highlight is basically that the framework that we conceived of at the start was flexible enough so that it becomes adaptable to different site conditions, different programmatic conditions. And that was a clear, very intentional and deliberate act on the part of the design to be able to do that. And then finally, we had the Study and Development Center. It's basically a series of 2 blocks interspersed with different voids. So the condition of this is slightly different from the others, wherein it ends with an open space. And of course, it's also single story. Also with the roof and infilled with windows. Moving forward, I think we'd like to discuss a little bit more about the details, the architectural details individually about the different parts of the building. So we start off with the roof. I think what was interesting about the roof was we did a standing seam batten roof, where the material is actually, it comes half formed, and we site form it and adapt it onto the roof. The idea is that we wanted to be able to allow the fathers of the community to be able to participate in the construction of the building, basically, and to be able to give their own to gain more ownership of it in the process as well. So this is just him nailing through holes, preforming the holes onto the roof so that it can be nailed more easily onto the battens. And of course, the architectural detail of that has to do with it being folded over the battens and nailed onto the roof. So you can see the handmade quality of this roof. Basically, it's not perfect, but we find that it's actually more beautiful that way, and it's more human. Next, the architectural tectonic quality of those blocks. We used shear wall, basically reinforced concrete boxes to sort of create those frames, and we cut out windows onto them. And that creates a really clear sense of sort of strength and stability, and it's contrast with this idea of the lightness of the frame. At the same time, the idea of concrete has a lot of material or potentialities, which we found, and we decided that to be able to express that, we wanted to just simply grind the concrete down and expose the aggregate. And sort of that becomes the architectural quality of the concrete. So you can see that's what it would look like in the joints of the plywood, basically. And in detail, there are some really beautiful material qualities that have evolved from it. So you can see the beauty of the grinding pattern. It's sort of honed, and you can see the aggregate mixed into it. It sort of has its own stereotomic quality, I think. Moving forward, we also had to detail a lot of the wooden frame, and how it's lifted off of the concrete structure, and how the steel plates are bolted onto it. There's a lot of detailing that went into sort of creating this frame, and the idea of it being a contrast but sort of related to the idea of this concrete. You can see here a very complicated jointing area. We spent lots of hours discussing this in diagrams. So we also wanted very clearly to hide the plates which connected the wood. So the plates are on the interior side, and the joints only are expressed by the bolts, basically. And of course, there's also this other idea of trying to create what do you call it? The intersections between the two spaces. So there are frames that have space in between, so that the other elements can actually join into it. Oh, it's like an overlap, sort of a bypass system. Oh.
Hey, okay. Incremental in a sense, no? How can also this allow for future adaptability or change? You know, they know the system and how it works. Now they can replace it if they don't think it works in the long run. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, agree, definitely. At the same time, it also allows us to sneak in wires and lighting fixtures inside those gaps. And it's a way by which we can make the structure neat and communicate sort of this architectural quality of wholeness, I think. And so this is the double volume story of the orphanage area.
It's kind of on top of one of the children's castle, just to give you an idea where we are.
Yes. Yes. So we wanted to express that frame and express it that frame quite clearly and honestly. So next we'll show basically a video.
So we'll try to give you a little bit of an idea of how the communication was happening on site, and also a little bit, the power of actually having the fathers work on a construction site, checking that work is done properly, because this is for their kids. But also another thing I want to say before I play is a film. But the idea that this is an ongoing dialogue is a conversation we're having together. And film was actually a way for us to do that. there was a local filmmaker, and he would be working with the parents and the children and the fathers, and the task was that they would constantly try to reflect on what is going on. What are we doing? What are we trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? You know, and then constantly the feedback, right? They see it. Then when you kind of project it back again, you go, oh yeah, or no, right? So there's this idea of seeing yourself in action, which is very important. So these films were actually made for the community themselves. This is about 1 minute only, so we just play through it.
Padrawing kami ni Ate Juve kung ano tam gusto nga may tabuhan among study center. Ang ako natugang drawing may to library, may da computer room and games. Tapos yung padrawing gyud ko may kung ano tam gusto nga bintana, nga puntahan para may hangin nga sumulod.
Ito nga magiging mga patimbintana. Hindi karuyag na mo nagtuhan na mga kabataan, bagyan mga nanay, nga mo magiging design ng mga paghimo. Kami ito natanan din na mga study center, dormitory, kami ito tanan manihimo.
Amang dinhimo nga mga bintana tapos kung anot amon gusto mabintahan pag tindugan amon study center amay yan ang naghihimahiraya ng model ng among mga buildings. Ito wala. Isa na sa gitna.
Skadi. Kami, naghihimo kami simpa na iibagadaira kay itamon mga partidilitan mga aparatos, mga labi na tamang music room. Magupay ko tang berada. Kami. Ang problema, kahit aming trabaho, nagbibay-baba, labi na kung iba, rin aram. Sabi na sa mga aram, rin na nagyayatan. Pag-abutin kung na iya, pag-abot na iyahin, nahihin mo na natin, may material, hindi matamo. Karabaw na upat ito, nagsasayo paglalakot. Wala sexual nila. Sabi ko, kung naalungin ko na natin kuhan, nakatrabaho natin, nabubuhat natin yung sakto.
We finished the buildings. The buildings were complete last August, and now the community is gradually moving in. I think maybe you want to explain the plans?
It's okay. We just show basically these are the drawings, architectural drawings that we had explaining the site. We can see the site, the finalized site plan on the lower right-hand corner. And basically we have the office, the orphanage, and the study center all mixed up, sort of located onto the site this way. So the intention was really to try to create, again, the protected corridor, protected spaces, and a connection to the exterior as well. So I think we try to achieve that architecturally and sort of in terms of the site plan and how it relates to, I think, the community interactions on a larger scale. So we'll just take you through the pictures of the finalized building, basically.
So this is just before they moved in, but this is the function hall. This is I think you saw the picture of the kids performing earlier. This is their performance space. In the back, if you go back, in the back you can see the orphanage building. So in the front you got the studies and center and the performance space. In the back the orphanage. This is looking down the walkway of the study center building. You got the performance space in the front, and in the back void, you got the study center room, classroom. The concrete volumes is in the far back kitchen, and the one closer is office. Through the doors here, you can see the study center space, classroom space at nighttime.
And I think what's really nice about this is the way that the windows are sort of the main feature of this building. So the concrete blocks are very subtle and very restrained, and then the windows, the doors and the windows, or the elements basically are that which give the real life to it. And in a sense, if we were to design this completely as architects, we would never think about doing it this way. I mean, it would be simpler, it would be more restrained, of course, but then that's where the beauty comes in. That's when people are able to layer meanings onto this building. So I think that's one of the beautiful parts of it. At the same time, the roof structure, it reminds us of how it's sort of a handmade building. It's how it's really related to a local context, and that the fathers have ownership of this building.
This is the doors when they're closed in the orphanage building. We're standing on one of the castles looking down into the living room between. This space we're standing in is the bedroom, technically, for the kids. These doors can be opened when the winds come or during daytime, depending on what use they want, what kind of climate they want through the building.
So it highlights the way that the kids and the fathers and mothers of the community really want to be able to have security, but also at the same time have this connection to the landscape and to nature.
This is looking at the same space, but when it's open. So suddenly this void between these two castles becomes, it frames the rice field in the back. It becomes almost like a portal. It's a very important space, you notice, for the kids in the end.
Also, what I'd like to highlight here is that this was clearly intentional of the openings sort of aligning through the building, and it captures a sense of connectivity to the larger context also. So we wanted them to feel like they're really connected to the larger community outside of it, but at the same time allowing for them to be able to close the buildings off when they wanted to.
Yeah.
And security, actually security was a major concern. Of course, we understand why. So this is just another building, view showing the same building, the concrete volume and how it relates to the frames and the windows, sort of the transom on top, and also basically the dormitory.
Yeah, so technically you can think, it was quite interesting when we worked with the families, you know, what needs to be inside the safe areas and what needs to be in the voids, you know. Activities happen during daytime often happen in the voids, you know, because you want the natural ventilations. Important things like infrastructure, bathroom, kitchens, the office space for the house parents to take care of the kids, and the bedrooms became inside this concrete volume. So this categorization of space and how it's used and where it relates throughout the time of the day was really, really, really important for them to define the use of this building to their needs and their daily rhythm. Yeah.
Next is just showing how the buildings sit into the landscape and how are they connected to the part, to the context where they are in, actually.
This is the office building. And this is looking from the activity space onto the orphanage building. The concrete box that you see in the middle of the orphanage is a shared kitchen and two separate bathrooms with a larger bedroom area on top.
And this part that we show in the middle is basically that protected space that the community wanted to have as private for themselves. So this is the part where the children can freely roam around even at night without having to worry too much about how the outside community or whatever negative elements that they find there could sort of intrude onto the site. So this is a very protected and safe space. So to end it, basically we'd like to sort of just recap the process of how it's conceptually framed. So again, the goal is to connect individuals to a community and to create a transformation from space to place. And of course, there is this, we found this philosophical barrier rooted in our orientation to and objectification of the world, basically, which it's so difficult to make that connection between, or transformation between these two elements. And of course, the hypothesis that we're trying to propose is basically that the individuals are connected to space by worldview, and that community is connected to place by shared values. But at the end of the day, what we really find the most important aspect of this is basically that it is about making a meaningful connection between a shared worldview and shared values. So in the end, we feel like basically the architect's role in using the design process as a catalyst for forming this worldview is something that we all can participate in. And sort of at the end, the goal would be to create architecture that embodies communities, shared values, which are rooted in place. So, just to summarize this whole thing, basically, is that what you're trying to say is that a worldview becomes a value system through shared meanings embodied in architecture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for listening. It's a very emotional project. It's very difficult to talk about because it's something that's been going on for a very long time for both me and Sudar. The reconstruction process took almost 3 years because we wanted to do this together.
Properly.
Yeah. So, very happy to, I guess we have time for questions.
Thank you again, Architect Alex and Architect Sudarshan. We're now opening the floor to a few questions. People who would ask questions can get a free copy of Future Art from our friends from BC Asia. Any questions? Just raise your hand. Any questions for Architect Alex and Architect Sudarshan?
My question is, how did you get involved with this? I mean, hello, there's so many talented Filipino architects and
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, you can ask. Yeah, how can we the architect do the question?
So, the so not essentially. I mean, the first project, I was 21 years old. I was a student, and I really felt like I was an outsider. I felt like I had no right to come here and talk about architecture or build a building for someone else when there's so much resources and knowledge already existing. I was, for me, I felt out of place. I was here and I was supposed to deliver this product. But that's not really that didn't feel right. At least it should be a process. It should be something. It should be a mutual dialogue between every member of this process. And I think there is a benefit coming from the outside. There is we're talking about this idea of worldviews, right? The community had one set of worldviews. The NGO, which invited me, Streetlight, one of the members, the founding member is from my hometown, which is the direct connection why I was invited. They also have their own worldview, and I have mine, right? But I think there is a benefit because if I recognize the situation with my hometown in Norway, I can feel that there is an established understanding of how things are, and in my situation, I think there is a strength when someone comes from the outside and says it can be different. To put perspective in things, and I think at the same time, what is it that we can share? What is the shared values that we also have in common? So that was also something very fantastic with being allowed to work with this community because they, straightforward. I mean, they had this tradition of Bainihan, and I was allowed to be a part of experiencing that feeling of Bainihan. Now, for me, Bainihan was a way for something. Coming to Philippines, so it's a chance for me to learn about myself and my own culture. Parian is like Dugnad. And Dugnad was not something I was very happy about when I was younger. Dugnad was something where I had to contribute to the collective and to do something. You would have to get up in the mornings, get a shovel, and then clean the street. It wasn't really... And obviously you end up with a meal. We had a lot of sausages, right, in our... But in Tacloban, it's the same thing. We got together, and it was not always easy. It's an effort, it's a contribution, it's energy, it's time. But we do it, we have fun, we talk about serious things. and then we have a celebration, a meal, a fiesta afterwards. You know, maybe not a fiesta every time, but like a type of celebration. And that was a mutual kind of experience that I felt, and I think they have felt too.
Yeah. I think there's, in addition to what Alex has said, I think there's value also to having theoretically what they call it an outside agitator, and I think he's just there to, maybe he was there initially to do his thing, of course out of his personal volition, but at the same time, there's value to it for us. Like, it is an outside agitator, which helps inspire probably others to say that, yeah, why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we thinking about this in the same way? So, yeah, maybe it's a little bit sad, but of course, there's positive things that come out of it. I think that's the.
I have to say I'm really inspired coming to the Philippines, seeing all the fantastic initiatives that are happening, and obviously this is one initiative which involved me as a foreigner. But I mean, there is a lot of initiatives,
there are.
and I think they should really be highlighted. Yeah.
Sorry.
Good afternoon. Hello. What tips can you give for us architecture students to be more involved in helping the community via design?
I think it's simple. Just do it.
Be interested and listen and learn from them. I was a student when we did the first project, you know? I was there to learn. And which I think, you know, now that I'm actually I'm graduated, I'm an architect, I'm running my practice. I've been trying to replicate this process we did in Globan in other countries like India, UK, China. I think even now it's a learning process, and will always be a learning process. So if you get good at learning from others, I think that's a really good starting point. So do it and learn.
Yeah, I think also put yourself out there, take the first step. I mean, sometimes it's a risk, you know, sort of. Like, the way that we got in touch with Alex was just basically, I felt the need to connect, and I said, I'll just, you know, write an email to him. So I sent an email just saying, okay, I'm introduced myself, and I want to volunteer, I want to help out. So, and then basically didn't hear from them for a few months, and then suddenly, after a while, I got an email, and apparently I wasn't able to read it, or whatever, it was in spam, and then they sent an email again, and then say, okay, yeah, sure, we should meet up. And so it just starts from that small email, basically, that connection that you want to try to build. So if you want to do something, put yourself out there, send an email, write to someone, or just volunteer. That's it. I
Show
think
your
it's
interest.
Yeah, show interest, basically.
Next question, let's have one from Adit.
I'm an architecture student from the. Hello. I would like to say that it is nice to be able to do some. Hello.
Maybe use this microphone.
I think it's nice to be able to see that the architects were able to do something better than for the communities, better than the politicians. And yes, my question is do you have any plans to carry out or continue this meaningful, relevant, and even poetic project to the other communities, not only in Tacloban, but also to other parts of the Philippines or even in other countries? Thank you.
Speak on my end, I think we're still continuing this practice, and I think we're moving on to try and sort of develop this project, even maybe in globally. So we're trying to do a project now in Vietnam, which sort of builds on and expands what we've learned from Tacloban, basically. So it's expanding on this idea of the framework, expanding on this idea of the theory that we have sort of tried to develop. And locally, though, I think it's definitely possible to expand to more areas. And of course, if you want to do something in a different area in your community, it's really possible to do it if you just, try to keep an open mind and really just put yourself out there, talk to well, politicians in some way, they do help. I mean, there's money there, there's sort of help there. We shouldn't discount all politicians altogether, I think. So there's still hope always if you're willing to dream, I guess.
And you also notice that as we are now moving to Vietnam, this community as well also has a Vietnamese tradition of paella. So it's a very human thing to come together to realize something that means something to all of us. So I think that if you can grasp when you do your work as a student with other students or with non-students, non-architects, is there something we have in common? What is the driving force to realize this and then do it?
We have a question over here.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. This is very inspiring, and I'm sure everyone agrees to this. But it's true that based on our experience, that it's roughly said that there are three things that actually make things happen. First, the professionals, the technology, exactly what you're doing. But there's also economics, and there's politics. You've mentioned a little bit about this, but then, like someone said, how do we keep on doing this? Because you can like stay here, we don't hire you. So we'd like that this thing would have a ripple effect, and many more people would do what you're doing, and that's why we're here. But I mean, as a case study, how did you relate with the politicians, as you've mentioned a bit, and then how did you get the permits? Who funds this? Where do we do this? Like, something more we can get started.
Okay, I'll start with the funding. Or how can you afford this? I mean, there's this discussion. The first project, currency. Which currency? Well, do you know dollars, right? I wouldn't be able to. The first project we had $3,000. And that was everything we had for the whole project. And this is where it really made me, because when you think about collective work, there's a whole lot of resources available that are not money. The families and relatives that can provide material, some had skills, some can contribute. So all that contributed to bring the price of the building down. So I think we need to recognize that there are other resources as money, but you can't get around it. So when we managed to build that building with a lot less than we really needed of money, but it was still expensive. When the Yolanda happened, this building, it had become a symbol for the organization. It represented their efforts to let the community take part in realizing their own children's dreams. So back in Norway, this was inspiring, When Yolanda happened, this made it to every TV screen at home. And banks, universities, private people, everyone contributed to bring together a funding base to build back. Now, but the point here is that it was the building and its physical presence that contributed to communicate the need to build back. So that the building generated the money in a sense. Obviously, also Streetlight and the organizations doing fantastic work, but the building was something physical and something that represented that something was fun. And that generated a lot of funds that allowed us to then start the process of building back.
In terms of the relationship to government and to permits and all that, so I think that legal aspect was handled by the architectural team from Locsin and also the engineers that we got on board. So we acted as architect of record, engineers of record, and sort of also that, as Alex was saying, it's a resource that we gave sort of pro bono in a sense. So it is a resource, but it also we needed the technical expertise and we needed the permit and the sort of the liability issues that come along with it. So it was given, and I think that helps to. I mean, it's part of the Bayanihan spirit that we mentioned. That sort of giving to a good cause. So I think, in a way, if the intentions are very clear, the solutions will appear. So the intention was very clear at the start. We wanted to build something, and it was a symbol, and the solutions appeared. Sort of magically, I don't know.
It had not been possible had not Luxin and Sudar stepped in. It's it's key that we all come together when there's challenges, and that's something I see in Philippines in general. When something happens, there's a common drive to take action, and that's inspiring. And I mean, the contribution from Luxin and everyone is. I wouldn't even dare to say what happened if they didn't step in.
Thank you so much. Maybe one more question, one last question. None? Okay, thank you.
Hello. I'd just like to ask, based on the hypothesis that you created over there, do you think that it can apply to other buildings in the Philippines? Do you think the same process can apply with the design process that are being developed today?
Done. For a high-rise, for example, I don't think it's been done because primarily that's led by a developer with an intention to build and make profit. And that's sort of the thing that we're trying to go against, this objectification and sort of treating material and people as a resource to be bought and sold, managed, and sort of exploited in a way. So maybe in some way this is a commercial endeavor, so it probably does not have enough space to aim at or target sort of these larger meanings about forming community and about forming a sense of place more than space. So while it is not yet done, it's not yet applicable, I don't see why it cannot be done. It just takes a little bit more creative and sort of maybe it requires a different process of funding and a different process of sort of getting involved on the architects and sort of the developer side. So, but again, if the intention is there, I can't see why not, right? So it's possible.
I also think that this is, I mean, you see so many fantastic professions that are contributing meaning and values in what they do. I think that we as architects can learn a lot from other professions in the way that others actually do create a sense of unity, a sense of collaborative effort, And I mean this I think is only applicable in architecture, and I see within art, music, any cultural activity we do is the type of approach to create a shared value and place. So it's very abstract.
Hello. Thank you for let's give the round of applause for Architect Alex and Architect Sudarshan. On behalf of WTA, to present our token of gratitude is Architect Matthew and Giselle.